Imagine looking around at an entire ocean, seeing hundreds of millions of years of aquatic evolutionary perfection, and saying to yourself, you know what? Screw this. I am done. I am walking. Around 400 million years ago, our ancient fish ancestors crawled out of the swamp, grew limbs, and eventually gave us the joy of paying taxes and sitting in rush hour traffic. But that was a long time ago. The ocean stayed full of normal fish who knew their place, kept their gills wet, and stayed in school. Except for one absolute rebel. Meet the mud skipper. The only fish on planet Earth that looked at the land, saw how exhausting it is up here, and decided to rage quit the ocean anyway. Now, when I say this fish lives on land, I do not mean it gets briefly washed ashore and flops around in a blind panic like a salmon having an existential crisis. Mud skippers spend up to 90% of their adult lives actively chilling out of the water. They hang out on mud flats, climb up mangrove roots, hunt land bugs, pick fights with their neighbors, and strut around the beach like they own the place. There is just one tiny, glaring, catastrophic biological problem with this entire life choice. They are still fish. They never actually evolved legs, and they completely forgot to evolve lungs. So, how on earth does an animal that has the exact physical blueprint of a wet sushi roll manage to conquer dry land? Well, it turns out the mudskipper survived by hot wiring its own anatomy with some of the most unhinged, duct tape biological workarounds in evolutionary history. Let us start with how it moves. If you throw a regular trout onto a riverbank, it has exactly one move: the violent, frantic flop of doom. But the mudskipper is an engineer. Over millions of years, its pectoral fins, the side fins normal fish use just to steer through water, turned into thick, muscular, jointed arms. It essentially has built in crutches. The mudskipper plants these two front fins into the mud, hoists its entire torso upward, and swings its tail forward, taking actual deliberate steps. Scientists literally call this movement crutching. If it needs to move faster, say because a hungry egret is diving out of the sky to turn it into an afternoon snack, it curls its muscular tail into a tight letter C, loads up the kinetic energy, and snaps its tail straight like a spring. This launches the fish up to 2 feet through the air. For a creature that is only a few inches long, that is the equivalent of a human casually leaping over a two-story suburban house from a standing crouch. So mobility is solved. It has the walking thing down. But that brings us to a much bigger hurdle: oxygen. As you might recall from primary school biology, fish breathe using gills. Gills work great underwater because water holds them open like silk ribbons, letting them absorb dissolved oxygen. But the second you pull a gill into the open air, the delicate filaments collapse, stick together, and dry out, leaving the fish to suffocate. The mudskipper saw this problem and came up with a ridiculous fix. It decided, who needs lungs when you can just turn your entire body into an oxygen sponge? Mudskippers use something called cutaneous respiration. Translation: they breathe straight through their skin, as well as through the soft lining inside their mouth and throat. As long as their skin stays wet, oxygen molecules from the air dissolve directly into a massive network of tiny blood vessels right under their outer layer of slime. You can think of a mudskipper walking on land like a scuba diver walking on the ocean floor, except completely backward. Instead of taking a tank of air into the water, the mudskipper takes a tank of water onto the land. When it leaves the ocean, it clamps its gill chambers tightly shut, trapping a big mouthful of seawater like a chipmunk hoarding nuts. It swishes this water around its mouth to keep its gills moist, while simultaneously absorbing oxygen through its slimy exterior. Sounds like an evolutionary cheat code, right? Well, not so fast, because this system comes with a brutal, ticking death timer. The moment a mudskipper's skin completely dries out, the pores seal up, oxygen transfer stops instantly, and the fish suffocates in the open breeze. It is constantly playing a life or death game of keep it slimy. Every single minute on land is a high-stakes race against the sun, forcing the mudskipper to constantly roll around in muddy puddles just to reset its biological stopwatch. And the indignities do not stop at their skin. If you are going to live on land, you also need to see where you are going. Underwater, light bends differently than it does in the air. If a normal fish sticks its head out of the water, its flat, aquatic corneas make everything on land look like a blurry, unrendered video game from 1998. To fix this, the mudskipper relocated its eyes straight to the top of its skull. They sit up there like two bulging, independently rotating ping pong balls. It can look forward at a tasty fly with one eye, while looking backward at an incoming predator with the other, exactly like a chameleon. But once again, the dry air creates a problem. How do you keep your eyeballs from drying into leather? Humans have eyelids and tear glands. Fish have neither. The mudskipper's solution is pure body horror. When its eyes get dry, it does not blink from the top down. Instead, it literally sucks its entire eyeball down into a wet, mucus filled cup inside its own skull, swishes it around to rehydrate it, and pops it back out. In 2023, scientists confirmed that mudskippers independently invented the act of blinking using zero mammal hardware, just by pulling their eyes into their head like a grotesque garage door. Now, you would think that being a half baked fish stuck in a brutal survival loop on a boiling mudflat would humble you. You would think the mudskipper would be quiet, cautious, and polite. Absolutely not. Mudskippers are some of the most aggressive, territorial little divas on Earth. When low tide hits and the mudflat opens up, it turns into an absolute battle royale. Mudskippers claim tiny patches of mud like feudal warlords. If a neighbor creeps even an inch onto another mudskipper's turf, they do not just swim away. They flare out their bright multicolored dorsal fins, puff their throats out to look twice their size, and charge each other on their fin crutches. When words fail, they enter full sumo wrestler mode. They raise their upper bodies off the mud, smash their open mouths together, and engage in high octane mouth to mouth wrestling matches, violently shoving each other backward until one gives up and scuttles away in shame. And if you think their fighting is ridiculous, wait until you see how they flirt. When mating season arrives, the male mudskipper has to convince a female that he has prime real estate. To do this, he climbs up onto the highest patch of mud he can find and begins doing terrestrial jumping jacks. He straightens his tail, leaps straight up into the air, flashes his giant, colorful dorsal fins at the apex of the jump, and lands flat on his face in the mud. He will do this over and over again, for hours on end under the blazing sun, hoping a passing female finds his awkward mud gymnastics irresistibly attractive. If a female finally pauses and decides his jumping routine is adequate, she follows him back to his crib. And this is where the story shifts from goofy cartoon to one of the most insane engineering struggles in nature. The mudskipper digs a deep, J-shaped burrow straight down into the thick tidal mud, sometimes over 3 feet deep. This burrow is their panic room. It is where they hide from predatory birds, where they cool off from the brutal tropical heat, and most importantly, where they lay their eggs. Here is the twist. The water sitting at the bottom of these mud burrows is almost completely anoxic. That is a fancy science term, meaning there is zero dissolved oxygen in it. It is stagnant, pitch black, and toxic. If a normal fish laid its eggs in that water, every single embryo would suffocate and rot within hours. To solve this, the male mudskipper takes on the most stressful, exhausting parental shift in the animal kingdom. He becomes an underwater Uber Eats driver, but exclusively for air. The male climbs out of the burrow, waddles to the surface, and takes a massive, greedy gulp of fresh atmospheric air, packing it into his mouth. Then, he turns around, dives back into the dark burrow, swims through the suffocating, pitch black water, and enters the underground egg chamber. There, he spits the bubble of air out against the ceiling of the mud ceiling. He does not do this once. He does this over and over and over again. He makes hundreds of round trips every single day, hauling microscopic payloads of atmosphere on his tiny fin legs, slowly building a subterranean, breathable air pocket for his unborn children. For days on end, without taking a break, he commutes back and forth to keep that bubble fresh so his babies can breathe. Think about that for a second. We are talking about a fish that leaves the water, goes to the land to grab air, brings that air back down underwater, and builds an air pocket inside a mud hole so its aquatic babies do not suffocate in the water. It is an evolutionary Rube Goldberg machine held together by pure parental spite. Which brings us to the ultimate, mind-bending irony of the mudskipper's entire existence. If you take a mudskipper and force it to stay submerged deep underwater in a normal aquarium, do you know what happens? It drowns. I am not joking. The creature is classified as a fish. It has gills. It was born in the water. And yet, if you prevent it from accessing the surface to gulp atmospheric air, it will run out of oxygen and suffocate to death beneath the waves. Evolution pushed this creature onto the land, hard-coded its survival to the atmosphere, and slowly deleted its aquatic software until the ocean itself became a hostile environment. Mudskippers are not a stepping stone to something else. They are not our ancestors, and they are not a missing link waiting to turn into lizards. They are a completely independent, parallel experiment in life, walking away from the sea. They got dealt the worst hand possible: no lungs, no legs, delicate skin, and a suffocating nursery. And yet, instead of giving up, they slapped a pair of fin crutches on their sides, turned their mouths into oxygen tanks, learned to blink by sucking their eyeballs into their skulls, and conquered the mudflats anyway. So the next time you feel like your daily commute is dragging you down, or you feel completely unqualified for the job you are trying to do, just picture the mudskipper, standing on 2 floppy fins in the blazing sun, fighting its neighbor over a patch of wet dirt, and carrying air in its mouth one bubble at a time just to prove the ocean wrong.